today to have Greta Nuebauer here to talk to us about the state legislature and what we do now with the new maps. But I want to welcome you and thank you again for participating in the forum. So I'm going to leave now. Marlene's going to introduce us. He's so good, she needs two introductions. For some of you, Greta Nuebauer, he's no introduction. Born and raised in Racine, Greta has worked tirelessly to make our communities fair, healthy, and prosperous for all of our residents. She has also supported progressive candidates for local, state, and national office to protect democracy and justice. Greta was unanimously elected as Assembly Democratic Leader in 2021. Wow. It did take her long to win the respect of her team or her elders, did it? Thank you for taking your time and being here, Greta. We know you well, but you always have something important for us. Thank you.
Well, that was a very generous introduction. Thank you so much. And I'm really glad to be able to spend some time with you all today. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm going to speak for a few minutes and then want to keep a lot of time for a question and answer back and forth. We did not get the PowerPoint connected, but I'll send around some visuals after. I suspect that many of you have already been looking at the new legislative maps and sort of zooming in on your district or competitive districts around the state, but I've got some good links I can share around where you can put in your address, where you can see, again, where those sort of most competitive new seats are. So, as Marlene shared, I'm from Racine, Wisconsin. I grew up around politics, sort of knocking on doors for candidates at a pretty young age. I really got the political bug when Barack Obama first ran for office. I went down to his announcement in Springfield and organized high school students in Racine during that election. And really believed in the vision that he put forward in that campaign about what this country could be. Then he got into office, right? And I think probably everyone in this room had a similar experience to me, which was realizing or struggling with what he was and wasn't able to do in that office. And I was in college at the time. And as a professor explained to me, and it's really stuck with me ever since, the people who got him into office went home, said, good job, right? And the people who opposed that agenda showed up and they got really organized. And that was a pivotal moment for me in the work that I did in understanding how important it was that there were people outside of Capitol buildings, right, organizing to put pressure on elected officials, to support elected officials to do the right thing. It's all good and well to have good people in office, but the communities around us need to organize, right, and need to make sure that we are continuing to push forward the work that has to be done. And so I started doing climate organizing work. I ran an organization called the Fossil Fuel Divestment Student Network for a couple of years that I founded with a number of other peers at the time. And we, as noted, were working on the issue of climate change. I have, like many of us, had an existential crisis about that issue, realized how much it was going to shape our future, our collective future, and was already impacting people in this country and around the world. And so got organized. Then 2016 comes along. I am working with students nationally on the issue of climate change. And I think, as many of us did, had a real reckoning around the state of democracy in our country. As a young person, I never really imagined someone like Donald Trump getting elected. And I, of course, it threw the climate movement into a real state of chaos because we all asked, well, now what, right? How are we going to push this person to take this issue seriously? And so, like many of the young people who I was organizing with, realized that we also needed to be doing more direct political work. And so I came back to my hometown, Racine. I got involved in some elections. I worked in the state capitol, and I grappled with the fact that Wisconsin was a huge part of delivering Donald Trump to the White House, and that if we were going to protect our democracy and strengthen our democracy in the future, Wisconsin was going to be an integral part of that, maybe even the center of that in the entire country. Now, on the statewide level, you all know that for over a decade, Wisconsin has been a testing ground for the right wing in terms of Koch brother money coming in and impacting elections, Act 10, gerrymandering, taking away voting rights, voter ID, ballot drop boxes, right, attacking local elections officials. Wisconsin has absolutely been a testing ground for the national right wing in terms of attacks on our democracy. And I think what they learned from gerrymandering in Wisconsin was that it worked pretty well in getting their agenda enacted in this state. They recognized that once they had a gerrymander in place, that it was incredibly hard for people in this state to hold them accountable to anything, right? If Act 10 and thousands of people around the state and in Madison can't change people's mind in a 50-50 state, you know that something is really wrong. And of course, all of us, I'm sure, have showed up to public hearings, have organized in our communities, who have been part of this movement of trying to push back over the last decade and found it incredibly frustrating. Because the reality is that the state legislature in Wisconsin has not been a democracy for over a decade. When a 50-50 state has a greater likelihood of a Republican supermajority than a Democratic majority, something is really wrong. And outside observers have called Wisconsin a democracy desert because of the gerrymander in our state and because of the extremely low likelihood that Democrats could get a majority even when they won the majority of votes in the state legislature. So, of course, that's the context that helps us arrive at this moment, which is that for the last decade, despite those incredibly difficult circumstances, people have organized and people have understood that fair maps were key to us being able to enact a progressive agenda of Wisconsin, to the voice of the people being heard in this state, right? When overwhelmingly popular policies like Medicaid expansion, appropriate investment in our schools, gun safety, you name it, can't even get a hearing in the state capitol, you know something is really wrong. Yeah. In the last legislative session, Republicans heard in committee 2% of bills proposed by Democrats. This session, they did better, 3.6%. And they were really proud of themselves, right, for hearing more bipartisan bills. And so, again, the dynamics in the state capitol that all of us have experienced as legislators, I've been there now for a little over 6 years, is the impact of a democracy that is really broken in our state. And our Republican colleagues deciding, essentially, we are not going to work with you. We are not going to listen to the people of Wisconsin on these overwhelmingly popular policies, and we do not feel like we are going to be held accountable at the ballot box. So, of course, a couple of months ago, something really good happened in Wisconsin, which is that we finally, after long years of work that I know many of you and people across the state put in, got fair maps in Wisconsin. These are maps that allow either party to have a real shot at winning a majority in this state. Under these maps, if you layer on Governor Evers' results from 2022, Democrats would get 52 seats in the state assembly, a majority. 50 is the majority. Under Biden's numbers, we would get 49 seats, his numbers from 2020. What that means is that it is incredibly close, right? These maps really are very, very competitive. And this is a very good thing for democracy in Wisconsin, first and foremost. Because being in this world, right, being involved in these campaigns, I was the leader last legislative cycle where we were really working to fend off Republican supermajority. I saw how few seats of the 99 in this state were actually truly competitive seats, right? You had one here, what was formerly the 81st, now it's the 84th, now it's the 61st, sort of Western Milwaukee, right? Bob Donovan sitting in this seat right now. Now it's a competitive seat. But there were really only a handful in the state of Wisconsin, right? Less than 5 truly competitive seats where it was really anybody's game. It's hot. What we have now are maps where there are 10 seats that Joe Biden won or lost by 2 percentage points or less. And there are a handful of additional seats that are just a little bit outside that range, but are also extremely competitive. I would say there are 15 very competitive assembly seats this cycle. And of course, all of the assembly seats are up for grabs. So the way that I see the moment that we are in is that people in Wisconsin had to work and had to organize for over a decade to push our way out of these incredibly difficult circumstances where we, in a way that I would argue is fairly unique in this country, were in an alleged democracy that was not a real democracy, and many people did not understand that because of how detailed and wonky it was, right? You had to dig into the numbers, you had to look at how Republicans drew the maps to really understand that. But the people of Wisconsin did come to understand how this was impacting them, right? People would show up to hearings, to those budget listening sessions, to the office hours of their legislators and be like, why does it feel like they don't really care what I have to say? Why does it feel like I'm not actually able to make an impact on my legislator, despite the fact that this is a state that I know to be a purple state, a highly competitive state where my voice should matter in what is going on in the state capitol? And I am very hopeful that that is going to change and that the people of Wisconsin are actually going to have an opportunity to really engage both in these competitive elections and in governing again. And that has the possibility, again, of fundamentally shifting the direction of our state. You know, something that Dave asked me to address was what are some of the bad things that Republicans have done in the last particularly like definitely have said. The really good news, right, was that we had Governor Evers in office who was able to veto some of these really bad policies. And then in the assembly, we prevented a supermajority by just 2 votes this last session. And so we were able to ensure that Republicans did not have the opportunity to override Governor Evers' vetoes. If we had not prevented that supermajority, it would have been like Robin Botts was the governor, right? He would have been able to pass anything he wanted, bring it right back, and do those overrides. And I will tell you, some of you may be aware that our members went to really extreme lengths this year to make sure that we protected the veto. We had everyone in Madison for every day that could have possibly been a session day. We had people in Madison with COVID sitting in their offices, isolated, because if they hadn't been there, we could have had veto overrides. Yeah. And we actually did have one night, it was late, it was 11 p.m., there were negotiations going on, we were on the floor, off of the floor, and the Republicans had not seen Steve Doyle all day because he had COVID. And he was in his office, and he was very sick, but he was there because he knew that he needed to be there. And at 11 p.m., they thought they had the numbers to do veto overrides. They did a call of the House, which is when they do a roll call, essentially. Steve Doyle comes in, and you see their faces fall because they realize they don't actually have the votes to do veto. And there were a few memes cast around of Steve Doyle on a white horse, you know, riding in, Gandalf, in the alley, right? But that was the dynamic that we experienced this year, right? It didn't matter that the people of Wisconsin chose Governor Evers to be the governor and to have the veto pen. It didn't matter that the people of Wisconsin elected us. Republicans were looking for every opportunity that they could to try to override those vetoes and get some of their bills into law. Some of those things that they, I'm sure, would have liked to override if they had had the opportunity. Tax cuts that primarily benefited wealthy Wisconsinites again and again, right? They tried multiple different times this session to get these tax cuts for really wealthy people into law. We said our terms, I think, are pretty reasonable. This tax cut has to benefit the middle class. The tax cut is primarily benefiting working Wisconsinites in the middle class. You got yourselves a deal. And we just could not find a deal, right? They kept doing these tax cuts that were for wealthy Wisconsinites. They also continued the culture wars this year in a really big way, right? They went after diversity, equity, and inclusion. They went after the university system. They went after trans kids, right? Particularly trans girls and youth. We saw exactly who Republicans are and exactly the kind of policies that they would put into place if they had the opportunity to do so. And the other piece that I'll mention on this is just that the level of, let's say, partisanship in political games, I would say was at almost an all-time high. In that, if you remember, they really seriously considered trying to impeach Janet Protasewicz not that long ago, right? She was elected about a year ago by an 11-point margin, or by 2. And then Republicans started to throw out this idea, toy with, threaten to impeach Justice Protasewicz. And really the only reason they had to do that was that they don't like her, they disagree with her on some issues, and they didn't want to see how she would rule on cases in front of the court. And the good thing is that despite their gerrymander, despite the fact that they understood that Janet being on that court was a problem for them, they were not able to do that. And I really do think that the reason that they were not able to impeach Justice Protasewicz was because they heard very clearly from the people of Wisconsin that they were not going to accept that. If Robin Vos had been able to get away with that, I have no doubt he would have done it, right? There's a lot at stake for him right now at the Supreme Court. But his members were going to Robin Vos and saying, I don't want to take this vote. My district just voted for Janet Protasewicz. 12 Republicans in the Assembly had districts that voted for Janet Protasewicz. And those members understood that if they went and tried to impeach her, they were going to face problems at home. And that was because people reached out, because people showed up. I know people who went to a legislator's yard sale because that was the only way they could talk to her about this vote, right? And made really clear that legislators would be held accountable if they tried to impeach Protasewicz. And that is a really, really important thing. And you will also note that Megan Wolf has not been impeached either, right? And that's a very good thing too. And I again think that that's because people in Wisconsin have made it really clear that they will not accept Republicans doing that based off of misinformation, based off of election deniers. And so, of course, now we go into the coming election. Thankfully, we do have Megan Wolf there. We have election officials across the state who are prepared to do their work, who are going to do everything they can to ensure access to the ballot box for eligible voters. And then we are going to have candidates around the state at all levels. Of course, we're going to have Joe Biden and Kamala Harris on the ballot, Tammy Baldwin, a number of competitive congressional elections around the state, and then the state legislature. The Senate has half of their seats up this year, the state Senate. Unfortunately, that means that they're not in a position to get a Democratic majority this year, but they have to pick up a number of seats in order to put them in the position to do that next cycle. And one of those in this area, it's the 8th Senate District, northern sort of suburbs, right, of Milwaukee. Jody Havish-Thinkin is running there. She's a great candidate. She has run before. She has significantly outperformed expectations before. That is a very close seat. We're going to pull up those numbers. So that seat, if you layer on the Evers numbers from 2022, he would win that by 51.04 percentage points. Biden, 50.28 percentage points. So she's going to need everybody's help in that seat, right? That is a really important seat for the state Senate this year. And then for the Assembly, we've got 2 really competitive seats in this part of the state, 2 seats we have to win, and 2 seats with Republican incumbents in them. So that's the 21st, that's an Oak Creek seat, that's got a little bit of the Garden District. That's Jessie Rodriguez. Yeah. She's a strong candidate there and that she's historically outperformed the ticket, right? People think that she is a reasonable person. People think she's a moderate. but she votes right there with Republicans on all of these issues, right? She does not support choice. She does not support the investment in our schools. We need to see all of the important issues to people in that district, and I know to all of you. And so that's going to be a really competitive targeted seat for us in the state assembly. And then we also have the 61st seat that used to be the 84th. Bob Donovan is moving to get back into that district. He does not want to run. Yeah, moving again. He's got his bag. His bags are probably right by the door, you know? He knows. But he obviously has moved a number of times to run for different races. It's our job to make sure, again, that people understand who Bob Donovan is, right? And the votes that he's taken this session and the priorities he has. Both of those seats are also Democratic leading seats. Those are seats we should win, but they're going to be extremely close because we've got these incumbents who people know. And then again, our job to make sure that they understand the votes they've taken against choice and against our schools, against healthcare, against building really safe and welcoming communities in Wisconsin. And so we've got great candidates who are going to be running in all those seats. We're working very closely with them. Our work as the caucus, right, as the Assembly Democratic Campaign Committee, is to get a Democratic majority this year. That is our goal. That's what we're setting out to do. That means flipping 15 seats, going from 35 in the Assembly to 50. It's a big lift. It's a big lift. A number of those seats will come to us a little bit more easily, right? So we've got a new seat in Racine. I have represented a good part of the city of Racine historically. We now have a second district that's going to really cover a lot of the city of Racine. It's a 60% Democratic seat. We're probably going to win that one, right? We've got a new, very blue seat up in northern Wisconsin. It crosses sort of the top of the state. Goes Bayfield, Ashland, Superior. That's a pretty blue seat now. That's actually, a seat that I think we're going to win, right? The incumbent there has said, I'm not lucky again. The incumbent in the Racine seat has said, I'm moving to a different district, right? So a few of those are going to come a little more easily to us, but a lot of them are going to be really competitive. Again, 10 seats that Joe Biden won or lost by 2 percentage points or less under these maps. And we have to win 8 of those seats in order to get a majority. It's seats Biden won, and then one more that he lost by 0.5 percentage point. That's what we have to do this year. And so that means getting great candidates in all these seats and running really fast races. All of our candidates in these targeted seats are committed to knocking on doors 5 days a week. They are going to be on the phones for at least 10 hours a week, raising money. And we expect that these budgets, frankly, are going to be different, higher than we've ever seen, to be honest with you, in these races. So it's, again, not going to be an easy lift, but I think it's possible. Some of you may have seen that one of our candidates announced just last weekend, I think it was, Yi Like-jong. He is running in Wausau. This is the 85th district, and for us, if you look at it by the Biden numbers, that's the majority maker seat. That's the 50th seat. He has been in elected office since he was a teenager, held 3 different roles. He's 29. He runs the Hmong Center in Wausau. He would be the first Hmong representative in the state of Wisconsin. And he had his kickoff, and I think had probably 100 people there. People in Wausau love him. Wow. He's running against an incumbent who is going to move to get back into this district, Pat Snyder, and so it is going to be a super close race. But there's a beautiful profile of Yi in the New York Times from a couple weeks back when he announced that folks should certainly check out. We can send the link around. Again, that could be the 50th seat, and so that is going to be extremely competitive. But Wausau, which has been gerrymandered to a really significant degree for the last 10 years, is extremely excited about the opportunity to run a really competitive race and hopefully to flip that seat. Sheboygan is another place I would point to. They were totally cracked under these maps. Many of the litigants on the fair maps cases came from Sheboygan because it was one of the most obvious examples of gerrymandering. And that community is so excited to finally have a competitive election and hopefully be better represented in the assembly. And we have a really great candidate they'll be announcing very soon here who's running in Sheboygan, really long-time leader in that community. The people who have stepped up to run in these seats understand that it is going to be very intense. right? We know the Republicans are going to throw absolutely everything they have at these folks, that they will make things up about them, right? Put it on TV, try to paint them in a way that is not true to that person's character. And that is the reality those folks are going to face. But it is truly so inspiring to me to go and sit down with these people and say, you got to knock on doors 5 days a week. You got to sit on the phones the rest of the time. They're going to throw all sorts of things at you. They're going to Photoshop your face into a mugshot and put it on TV, and your kids are going to see that. Are you sure you're up for this? And people being like, yes, this is such an important moment, and I want to be part of flipping the assembly, getting a Democratic majority, restoring rights to people in Wisconsin, to supporting unions, to building a democracy that is able to actually represent us. And I'm very excited for you all to meet some of these folks as we proceed in the election cycle, because I do think it is just so inspiring to see these folks step up in these really difficult circumstances, knowing what they're going to face, but believing that it is important enough that they're going to put themselves and their families through a very challenging election cycle. So with that, I think I'm going to pause, and I'm really happy to hear from you all. Questions, thoughts, specifics if I can about districts. I will just also say that, again, I know that you all, I recognize, of course, a lot of familiar faces in this room have been doing the work in so many ways. And this moment really is a victory for all of us in this state and for our democracy. And I think when we look back on this moment, we are going to see really clearly that what it takes to actually move ourselves out of a fake democracy into a real democracy. And this moment is going to shift the trajectory of this state. And everyone who has been part of the fair maps fight, of supporting candidates, of helping Governor Evers, of preventing those supermajorities, was part of all of this work that was needed quietly behind the scenes in the dark of night, right, to ensure that we got to this moment. So I am just really grateful to you all for the work that you have put into. So.
Isn't Greta amazing?